is another.
Hi, everybody. We're back for our afternoon segment. This is the session. You're frozen in time. Thank you very much. We're really excited about this next session, as we are about all of our things. But the next two people are really pushing not only technology, but the design, the ideas behind interactive television, the future of how we think about communicating about TV. So these are the futurists. These are the sort of rock stars of our industry, and I don't think they get enough attention and enough kudos. So I want to introduce our first person, whose name is Nathan Shedroff. He's actually here in town, and he's the program chair, MBA in Design and Strategy. And then after Nathan, we will talk to Dale Herrickstad. So I'd like to welcome Nathan Shedroff to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we could get the monitor up, that would be great. My co-author, Chris Nossel, and I, who will probably be sitting there in just a second.
Just slightly interrupt. If you sit closer to the podium, you'll be on camera.
Okay. Alrighty, so I can't move around that. Drats. So my co-author, Chris Nossel, and I, who will appear in just a second, have been researching science fiction for about 5 years, which is to say we've been watching lots and lots of science fiction. And we've been doing so for a specific reason. We've been looking to the interfaces that appear in science fiction film and television to see what kinds of lessons that we can learn that can apply back to apply directly to the development of real interfaces. And we found a lot of them. We found over 100 of them, in fact. And with all of the discussion about Siri-enabled television in the last year and other kinds of voice-activated interfaces, I'm here basically to share a selection of the lessons that we've learned that apply directly to anthropomorphism, which is to say, when you try to make the system seem human. There's some interesting lessons, there's some difficult lessons, and maybe they give you ideas about what you can do if you want to try anthropomorphism in your own systems. To give you a brief overview of our investigation, we've found that sci-fi and the real world are in direct influence of each other. So basically, the world of design and real products are influencing the world of science fiction and what we see on screen, especially in television film. And basically, science fiction is becoming considered a development process. In fact, there are several companies, Intel's one, and Intel's actually tracking many companies that are using science fiction specifically as a development process in the development of real world interfaces, because it's essentially a prototyping method. The real world influences things that we see in science fiction, like this. This is actually a piece of art, but we also see it in designed products and services. This is a piece of art by Damien Hirst, and if anyone ever saw the movie The Cell, can I have the audio on the computer, please? There we go. Sorry. Looks a little familiar after the first image. Actually, this is a much cooler image in the sense that since it's all CGI, no horse was hurt in the creating of this. You can see that the heart is beating, the lungs are breathing in and out, et cetera, which is something Damien Hirst only wishes he could probably have done in his artwork. So production designers, directors, other people, even screenwriters, are being influenced by what they see in the real world, and it shows up in the world of science fiction. But more interestingly, stuff that we see in science fiction, specifically in the interfaces and the behavior that we see in science fiction, is showing up in an influencing way for real products and services.
Magneto is here, Liberty Island. Now, presumably, his objective is to mutate the world leaders at the UN summit on Ellis Island.
He doesn't know his machine kills. And judging from what the professor saw, if Magneto gave Rogue enough power, he could wipe out...
So
Magneto is here, Liberty Island.
So what's interesting about this clip from X-Men is that in it, when it got to the end of the film where this clip is, a man sitting in the audience by the name of Douglas Caldwell, sitting there with his son watching a movie that he pretty much didn't want to see in the first place. But he sees this clip and he realizes, that's what I do. That's my job. He works at the Army Corps of Engineers, creating something called advanced sand tables. We still call them sand tables after hundreds of years, but basically they're battlefield simulation can imagine if this was a big vat of sand and you scooped it over here for the mountain range and scooped it over here and put down little things to simulate the battle theater. He makes these things. Right before this film, they look more like, if you have a friend that does model trains and creates sort of vast landscapes with meticulous detail, that's sort of what they used to create as advanced sand tables, and they'd make these things and then ship them off to Iraq and Afghanistan and other theaters of war. Not too good if you got the details wrong or you had your data, your data was too old or it breaks during transportation. He sees this and realizes that's a much better solution. And so what he does is go back to the DoD and create an RFP to create this. And this is the Xenotran Mark III, I think, dynamic sand table. And what it is essentially a pin board of magnetically controlled pins, just like we sort of saw in the suggestion of the X-Men. But what they've done is they've actually put a white rubber sheet over it and they vacuum it down. They create a vacuum inside this machine so it vacuums into creating these contours. Then they can project satellite imagery on top of it. What's really great about this and why it's dynamic and why it's sort of one better than what we saw in X-Men is that they can change scale like that, they can change location like that. They've done this for the moon, they've done this for Mars landing, et cetera. This idea exists because an engineer saw a science fiction film, went back to the DoD, and referenced that scene in an RFP for the Department of Defense, which I just find sort of mind-boggling. But that's the kind of stuff that we're seeing, and that's the influence that science fiction can have in our own real-world interfaces. Here is an example. This is the first example sort of robots that we see. This is 1927, I believe, Metropolis. This has been a phenomenon in film and science fiction for a long time. It was certainly in writing and literature for even longer than that. And so anthropomorphism is the depiction of systems, in this case a robot, but it doesn't have to be a robot, as we'll see in a second, as human or having human characteristics. This can be sometimes confusing to users. It can be really cool to other users, but can also divert attention from maybe what the focus should be of the system. Sometimes it can imply use and features that the system doesn't support, or it often implies intelligence where the system certainly has none. Now, this is a real phenomenon. We all do this. We talk to our cars. We name our Roombas, for instance. Oh, I can move around, right on. Okay, so we name our Roombas. You probably have friends that take this too far. This is a natural human reaction to complex systems. There's a group in Stanford that researches this. They have a great book called The Media Equation that describes why and how this anthropomorphism works in terms of our expectations and our social relationship to complex systems. We do it with cars, we do it with stereos, we do it very much with computers and different software. We even do it with microwave ovens, et cetera. It's mostly because we're kind of weird. It's not that we think that these systems are alive or we think that they're intelligent or think that they're human, but in our busy worlds, we have a shorthand for dealing with complex systems, and all our training for complex systems comes with other complex systems, which are people. And so we have a shorthand to treat technology like people, even when it's not maybe so appropriate or when it doesn't map to the capabilities and the behavior of the system.
Don't touch Turbo Boost. Something tells me you shouldn't touch Turbo Boost.
We see this in popular media all the time. We see it in experiments that companies use. I use this example specifically to show that it doesn't have to be a human visual depiction to make this work. Kit became probably the most well-acted character in that television series, maybe. Kit became a character in the system simply by having a voice. Didn't need a human. That doesn't look like looks like a Cyclops. Doesn't look human. The car doesn't look human. There's no other depiction of Kit being human, and yet we just accept him as another person and as a co-worker in this case, or at least a character from an audience standpoint, simply because he has a human-sounding voice. This is sort of the easiest way to do this, and if you're looking at creating anthropomorphic systems or interfaces in your own products, this is kind of an easy way to do it. Because the system itself becomes a character. It becomes essentially a coworker, or at least a guide that is referenceable, and helpful to your audience, to your user. Here's another example. I apologize for the projection's a little bit dark. It's a little hard to see. Most of you probably grew up on this film or certainly can remember this scene. We know that R2-D2 is scared. How do we know that? Simply because the beeps and and buzzes and sort of chirps that he makes. In this case, it's not even kit. There's not even voice. It's not even human sounding. And we interpret, at least what the director hoped we would interpret. This is an interesting example because it proves that you can trigger this effect of anthropomorphism, of connection and assumption about humanness or human capabilities in systems without using imagery of a person, without using sound and voice of a person. This gets pretty minimal. It's just beeps and buzzes, and by that, it actually works. Here's another example.
Just give me a second.
Voice and image together.
Promise for a change.
You have changed, Sam.
Hey, Gertie, since I've been up here, I've sent Tess, I've sent her over 100 video messages. Where did those messages go? Did they ever reach her?
Sam, I can only account for what occurs on the base.
What about the messages she sent to me?
Sam, I can only account for what occurs on the base.
What's interesting about this to me is here we have voice and image together, but they're assuming that there's not a lot of capabilities. There's no like three-dimensional, human, realistic representation of imagery. In this case, in this film, there's only two characters in the whole film anyway. One of them's a computer, and everything we know about this computer or interpret or infer about its feelings, and it does have feelings, happens through this pretty minimal, not terribly expressive voice, and then these little emoticons. And it's very effective. This kind of combination, very simple representation of imagery, very simple representation of voice, can make for a fairly expressive interface for something like a television, especially when there's not a lot of bandwidth or a lot of processing power. It doesn't take a lot of image resolution and high quality resolution to trigger this effect. In fact, when we don't try to make it super realistic, often it's more successful. Now, lots of companies have tried this in their products. Microsoft is pretty famous for trying this. These are just two of its many examples. And for the most part, the industry has not seen that these have been terribly successful products. In fact, they're often derided products, especially the gentleman on the right here, Clippy. And this proves how difficult this can be to get right, especially in the real world. We're willing to accept things in science fiction as an audience that maybe we wouldn't accept on products that we use every day, every hour, every minute, et cetera. This can be a difficult game to play if you decide to play it. And that's why some of these lessons are really important, because it can be powerful, it can be endearing, it can be brand building, it can make complex systems more easy for your users to use. But if you don't do it right, it can be damaging to your brand, damaging to your products. In this case, for instance, this is Ms. Dewey, also a Microsoft product. It's essentially, she's a video front end to what is essentially Bing, a search engine.
I only have one thing to say to that. No gold tooth, ghetto fabulous motherfucker can step to this piece of just because you pimping some video.
So what I don't understand about this example is, if you were going to play this game and you already knew that it was difficult because of your previous attempts, like, why would you be so edgy? Why would you take such risks with the personality of the system that you raise the stakes of failure? Ms. Dewey doesn't exist anymore. It was more of an experiment. But it's clear that Microsoft is not playing it safe, which is not something necessarily that we normally assume with Microsoft. Here, the personality expressed by the system isn't exactly the most helpful and sort of nice and wonderful. My suggestion to you is if you're going to play this game, this may be the highest risk way to play it, and you might want to actually start, at least with earlier products, on the other side. This is because systems become social actors. They have to fit our social norms of what we expect as perfectly good human behavior. When they cross behavioral lines, when they when they transgress social conventions, that's when we find them annoying. That's when we find them, in this case, kind of inappropriate. When you play this game, if you're going to do it in your interfaces, you need to make sure you're well aware of the social requirements for what an interaction between two people are, because the system is going to be considered a person or a character from.
You have 3 messages. Your graduate research team in Guatemala, just checking in. Robert Jordan, a second semester junior, requesting a second extension on his term paper. And your mother reminding you about your father.
Surprise birthday party next Sunday.
Today you have
Here's a more successful example of this. Phil, who's the gentleman in the corner, is just a guide, just an agent. He has a fair amount of capabilities. If you watch all of Knowledge Navigator, which is about a 7-minute film, this is pretty old, 1987, I think. It was a pretty compelling vision, and partly the reason why it works is that Phil doesn't overplay his hand very much. He doesn't have a huge expressiveness in terms of his voice or his visual representation. He's not telegraphing to the user that he's as capable as a person, otherwise maybe he would be rendered much more realistically. And for instance, he's interruptible. You saw the guy sort of touch him and he stopped talking. That's the kind of assistant we might need to have, as opposed to something that wasn't playing the social game that we expect from this kind of relationship.
I know you're Neo. Be right with you.
You're the Oracle?
Bingo. Not quite what you were expecting, right? Almost done. Smell good, don't they?
Yeah.
I'd ask you to sit down, but you're not going to anyway. And don't worry about the vase.
What vase?
That vase.
Now, the corollary, I know I've already suggested that if you're going to try anthropomorphism, maybe you tone it down a little, maybe you don't take such high risks, you downplay the visual quality or the resolution of the depiction of image or voice, etc. Here's an example, though, that shows us how powerful, when you get it right, how powerful it can be if you up the resolution, up the quality of the depiction. In this case, in the Matrix, the Oracle, this woman here on the left, she's a piece of code. She's a program. She's a predictive program. In fact, we learned that the Oracle can tell the future, right? If Neo had walked up to a kiosk with a command line interface, and that was the Oracle, and his interaction with the Oracle was through this sort of very obviously programmatic code, it'd be a little hard for us to interpret or believe that this program is going to be telling the future. But when a program is depicted with such realism in this case that programs are indistinguishable from humans, that raises the expectation. And when the system can behave with, can match those representations, it can be really compelling. It can be incredibly successful and expressive, but you sort of have to make it that far to make it work, and that's because of something called the uncanny valley. And so this is actually a diagram. Data is sort of just off the uncanny valley. This is a concept that was created by a Japanese researcher named Masahori Mori. And what he's basically depicting here is that as we move along this line of realism, from not real at all, like maybe Kit is over here, and that character, the computer from the moon with the little emoticons, is sort of over here. There's nothing really human about him. And this is where the Oracle is, indistinguishable from humanity. As we move across this, the acceptance curve for technology, for systems, changes. It actually rises. This is the value of anthropomorphism right here, but something really critical happens here. That's called the uncanny valley. And what it's saying is that when you get too human, when it gets sort of in the data range, which definitely humanish, but something's wrong with it, our acceptance of technology and systems crashes. And this is why a lot of the kind of realistic 3D robots and systems that are coming out of, let's say, Japanese research labs that are trying to be super, super real, but we all can tell they're not. They sort of look like creepy sex dolls. That's what's happening here. If you can't get it right all the way, it's actually worse than trying to get it right in the first place. And this is why things like, I won't say Clippy, but Knowledge Navigator, this is why we talk to our cars. This whole round region over here is ripe for experimentation and for prototypes and for systems that hit the market.
I'm searching. I'm searching. Give me a minute. I got him.
He's getting on the trends.
This is another search engine. This is from a film called Until the End of the World. In this case, the system isn't trying to be depicted as human. It's being depicted as sort of an animal. Here, it's called Bounty Bear. And this is another hint that I'm going to give you, and that is because it's hard to miss the uncanny valley. It's hard to play this game. We've seen Clippy, we've seen Ms. Dewey. If you depict your system more as an animal or a pet, our expectations of its social behavior go down as users. So you can probably get away with a lot more with a system like a Roomba, system that looks sort of cute and alive, but not necessarily human, because we will make allowances as users for that. We will apologize for the system. So it doesn't have to just be human. This is sort of zoomorphism, but it's the same principle as anthropomorphism. This example from
Day 11, test 37, configuration 2.0. For lack of a better option, dummy is still on fire safety. If you douse me again and I'm not on fire, I'm donating you to City College. All right, nice and easy.
It's a wonderful moment where we see the robot that's holding the fire extinguisher sort of do this. We anthropomorphize everything. That's why if you've ever seen the original short from Pixar with the two desk lamps playing, and it's so endearing, here, Dummy, which is that robot over there, who is sort of much aligned but comes to the rescue at the end of this film, we anthropomorphize that, and there's no voice, just like R2-D2. There's no human depiction. There's no sort of visualization or representation of humanness. It's all done through behavior. It's all done through gesture. That speaks to the power of this, and it also speaks to the opportunity for you that if you don't want a bust of a Ms. Dewey-like head sitting in the living room, because who wants that? And you don't want to try to make sure you can do a nicely rendered, super dynamic depiction of a character on screen. You can just use the behavior of the system to imply this, and it's actually sort of an easy way to ease in.
Public Library Information Unit, box registration NY-114. How may I help you?
Oh, a stereopticon of some sort.
Stereopticon? Oh, no, sir. I am a third-generation fusion-powered photonic with verbal and visual link capabilities connected to every database on the planet.
A photonic?
A compendium of all human knowledge.
In this example, this is sort of the ideal, right? Now, the photonic here, the library assistant, he's got a little attitude too, not quite as much as Ms. Dewey, but much better sort of social skills than Clippy. This represents sort of where we could go with interfaces, computer interfaces, television interfaces, other kinds of media interfaces. But this represents a lot of work. This represents technology that we don't have, and I don't mean sort of computerized technology. I mean, we don't understand the social dynamics and how to encode them into technology to make this work right yet. And it's the social dynamics that make this successful or not unsuccessful for people. It has nothing to do with the realism or the 3D rendering engine or the realism of the voice, et cetera. It's all about the social dynamics. It's all about the behavior. And so if I leave you with anything today, it's the behavior of the system can engender connection with users. It can become a character. difficult to do. We've seen successful examples and we've seen unsuccessful examples. But it's the behavior that you need to concentrate on, not the engineering, not the coding, not the processor speed. All those things are important to support and enable this, but if the behavior isn't right, it really doesn't matter what the specs are for the technical specs of the system. It's not going to be appropriate. So I'm going to leave it there. We have a little bit of time for questions. Some of the many lessons that we've included, we have a book coming out in August, are going to scroll up, and thank you for your time. Are there questions? There, where's there? Oh, right on. Yeah, you might as well wait for that.
So in terms of the uncanny valley, I was curious, it kind of evoked for me like some of the recent failures in terms of motion cap technology in film, for example, how things seem too real but not real enough, like you mentioned. I was wondering, in terms of sort of scripted content or content that you just, maybe for lack of a better word, passively watch, that seems to be the case. But for video games, for example, that seems to be really, really effective. I mean, I was wondering is there something that happens in terms of the transformation when you start to play a character that might be a little less than perfect? It might reside in the uncanny sort of space, yet still really is able to be real for a user who's able to actually like assume that identity or maybe something like that.
I see two parts of this. The first is realization or high resolution sort of realism in the game itself. We will accept a great deal in a game that isn't realistic. I mean, just think of Pac-Man, right? It didn't get any less realistic than that, or even story games that are just text-based games. Even as the technology has grown in the game system, and now it's kind of incredible to watch like Madden football, and it's so cinematographic that it is kind of hard to tell from a distance that it's not real. I think that for characters, it becomes much more important that you get this right than it is for scenery and cars and all sorts of other objects. So that's one piece of it. But game systems themselves are in a special category where we already release a lot of expectations of reality. That's what you do for science fiction, right? Audiences will pretty much accept almost anything as a premise as long as it's kind of internally consistent. When it's not internally consistent, then you get problems and people go, well, that was dumb. It's all dumb. I mean, none of it makes sense. None of it's real, right? But as long as it holds together. So in a game system, I think you can get away with things that you can't necessarily get away with in productivity systems. That's why Clippy and Ms. Dewey are kind of such annoying failures, because we're not playing a game. We're not in an entertainment mode. We're in a productivity mode. We're in a work mode. And there it becomes critical. Roomba's not so bad because we don't, Roomba's like a pet. We don't expect a lot of Roomba, even though that's a productivity mode, not an entertainment mode. So when you're watching television, the programming you may be watching may be entertainment, but the control of the programming is, I would say, work. It's productivity. And so if that's not right, you're going to potentially really annoy a lot of people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Actually, we haven't explored trustworthiness in characters, but the two researchers at Stanford explore that and a lot more. Persuasion, flattery, trust. The book by Cliff Nass and Byron Reeves is called The Media Equation. And if you're interested in this area at all, I would really suggest, it's probably the best written book on these kinds of subjects. And yeah, what they were able to show was that if the system behavior was right, people would trust the system very often more so than coworkers. But the system behavior has to be right. Yes? Last question, sorry.
How far do you see this going? How close is someone going to want to come, while avoiding the valley, to the depiction of the real human?
Well, I think the engineers and designers in the room, and certainly in me, want to see that last example. They want to see the Matrix. They want to see, for the most part, these kinds of depictions that are very familiar and very comfortable and actually comforting. I think watching television is sort of a comforting mechanism in our lives often anyway, depending on what channels you're watching. I think that is the ultimate. I think that's where everyone will ultimately steer to. I think we're a long way away from that. And along the way, the success factors of getting there successfully are all due to the social behaviors and getting them right. A lot of designers are more focused on the visuals, and a lot of engineers are more focused on the technology. So unless they align and then look at the social behavior, we're going to fumble our way there. If we work together, if we pay attention to people and sort of humanistic social relationship, we can get there much faster. But I don't think that we really understand ourselves very well or to understand social relationships. I mean, that's why we have psychology and psychiatry. I don't think we have agreement even about how these social relationships might play out. And in that sense, it's going to be a really interesting journey there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nathan.